Hi, welcome to the tutorial. Jump to these times present on the screen for whichever part of the setup or installation you're looking for. Thank you. Hi, welcome to the Windows installation guide. Now, to get this installed on Windows, we're going to assume that you have some software already installed, like we require Python and Git on your system, but just in case, we're going to go through a quick Python installation guide using UV, a Python package manager. Through this, we're going to install Python version 3.11, which is what you need on Windows to run our software. Specifically, we're going to use winget, the Windows package manager, to install UV, and then use UV to install Python 3.11. Great. Now that UV is installed, we're going to use it to install Python version 3.11. This is mostly just for later on. We have the correct Python version for the Windows project that we've made. With that out of the way, we're now going to clone the GitHub repository into our local file system so that we can access the source code that we're going to compile. Then we're going to create a virtual environment using UV and our Python version 3.11. This is so that we can download our software from our requirements file.txt without messing with your global dependencies. So let's enter that virtual environment and first activate it. Now, as mentioned, we're going to install from our requirements file the dependencies that our system relies on. Now, we're going to run our application just to test that our Python versions have worked and that everything's kind of working together. You'll notice here, as it loads, great. All of our packages work, our Python version is correct, and our system runs. Now, we don't really want our users to have to go through the terminal every time they want to open this application, so that's where PyInstaller comes in, as we've highlighted right here. PyInstaller allows us to turn our application and our source code into a single executable file. This means you don't have to go to the terminal every time you want to call it, and we use this command right here. You may want to pause to write it down. Essentially, this command turns all of our source code into the executable we mentioned that you can put on your desktop and click whenever you want to call it. Now, let's go to our Data Buccaneers directory in our file system that we downloaded earlier with the git clone. You'll notice this dist directory, which was made by PyInstaller, which has our application executable right here. Double click it, and you'll notice in a few seconds our application opens on its own. Great. Essentially, this abstracts away having to use the terminal every time you want to open it. So, as a use case, you can take this application executable, move it to your desktop, and click on it whenever you need to use it. Thanks for listening to the Windows tutorial. That's all from our side. Hi, welcome to this Apple installation guide for our software. Now to start, we kind of assume that you have some software already installed, that you have Python, and that you have a version of Python that works with our system, usually Python 3.11 to 3.13. Here, I'm going to make a quick directory just to store our Python code, and I'm going to enter it. And we also assume that you have Git installed in your system so that you can git clone this repository that we use, Data Buccaneers. Within this repository is our source code and all the code and application that we'll need. Now, within our Data Buccaneers directory, you'll notice that we have our requirements file.txt. This is all the dependencies that our code uses to actually run. Before we get into actually installing all this, we're going to create a virtual environment through Python, which is going to allow us to section off this downloaded code from the rest of our global system. So let's make that virtual environment, enter it. We're going to source the activation binary so that we can enter the virtual environment officially. Now we're going to leave the virtual environment, go back to that requirements file, and pip3 install it. This is going to use the virtual environment to install all of our dependencies separate from our global system. Now that all of that's been installed, let's really quickly just check that it's been installed. Great. All right, now that we have all of our packages installed and we're currently in our virtual environment, let's actually run our program to make sure that it works. So this means we're going to call Python on src app UI, ui.py, and yeah, let's just wait a few moments, make sure it runs. Great, really scary there. Awesome. This is essentially what we expect. The Python package here runs as expected, but we don't want you to have to go to the terminal every time we want you to use our product. Before actually going on to PyInstaller to generate an executable, let's first check, just in case, that we're using the correct Python and PyInstaller. PyInstaller is a library we installed from that requirements file that allows us to turn our source code into an executable. Just in case you have PyInstaller in your global system, make sure you're using the virtual environment one. Here, I'm using the tool called where to confirm that the topmost PyInstaller is the one in our virtual environment. Then I've deactivated, and now I'm reactivating our virtual environment just to be extra careful. This can lead to a lot of nasty headaches if you're trying to install something. But as you can see here, PyInstaller is installed, and we're using the correct one. From here, you might want to pause for a second to write this down. We're going to use PyInstaller to generate a single file executable that exists on our system. This will allow us to move this application executable to our desktop and click on it whenever we want to call our system instead of having to call it through the terminal. Great. Now that it's finished generating the executable, I'm going to open this directory on my system, and you'll notice the dist directory is now generated. Now there's two executables in here. We recommend staying away from the top one and instead using the app file that's been generated. This is similar to just any executable application on your system, and I've double clicked it here, and it does take a little bit to run. And while we wait for it to run, this is essentially alleviating the need to go to the terminal every time you want to open this tool. Great. Thanks for listening to the tutorial.